Hello everyone, Hyper here, and welcome to episode 1 of the Art of Warcraft. I recently found myself motivated to delve into rated PvP, and especially into Arena, since this is one part of WoW where I was never really competitive at the higher end. So this was my next logical step after reaching a reasonable and what I consider to be a respectable ranking in PvE. I wanted to try out PvP. My goal for this series is to improve at the game as I go along, and try to reach gladiator, and along the way to share this knowledge with you guys of everything I've learned, everything that's helped me improve, to help you guys improve as well. I will start with the most basic concepts, and with each of the steps and each of the episodes we're just going to build on the previous knowledge to help everyone improve regardless of the class you play. BFA has a huge focus on PvP, but as I found out, it's actually a lot harder to get into PvP, especially rated PvP, than it is to get into raiding. And there's a few reasons behind this, since obviously when you get into a raiding guild, you just join a guild, find a guild who raids the hours that you can, and you have the team. That's it. You just show up for raids and you have the group to go with. But for PvP, you kind of have to find your own people, you kind of have to know people to play with, or look through the LFG system, and that has some of its own issues that I will hopefully give you guys some tips on how to improve that. This episode will focus heavily on things that you will be doing before even stepping foot into the arena. So first of all is add-ons and macros. There are some basic macros that you should have set up, and even if you think you won't need them at a lower level, it's good to set them up if you're trying to push some rank or get better at the game, because they will get you comfortable early on with these macros, which will become much more important later in the series. You should have focus macros set up for basically all CC, all interrupts, and if you have like dispels or purges, for example, you can also set up focus macros for those. But there's essentially two ways of doing these. The first way of doing this is setting up a macro in a single keybind. So this will be a 2-line macro, or well, technically 3-line, but the first line doesn't really do anything. You want to have the modifier in the first line, so if you want to use shift as your modifier, then you can use that. You can also change it to control or alt, so those are the 3 possible modifiers. And if you don't know what a modifier is, it's essentially when you press down a keybind, normally you only press down one button, but you can also use a combination of buttons. So a modifier just basically enables a combination. So you can have, for example, your kick on number 4, and then your focus interrupt or your focus kick on shift number 4. So for the macro, it's a 3-line macro or 2-line macro. And in the first line, you want to have the modifier that you want to use, and then make sure it casts add your focus. And then in the second line, you want to have it add your target and just the spell name. So you can use this example on the screen and set it up for any spells that you might want to set it up for. The second way of doing this is to just have your regular ability bound to the keybind that you already use for it, and then bind a separate action bar slot to a shift or control or alt version of it, and then make a macro that's at focus and put it on that button. So there's kind of 2 different approaches with this. One of them only takes up 1 action bar slot, the other one takes up 2 action bar slots, but you're using the same amount of keybinds. So if you're limited on action bar slots, then go with the first version. If not, then go with the second version, or whichever one you prefer. Next, for essential add-ons, you probably noticed that a lot of high-rated PvPers, high gladiators, rank 1 players, people who compete, don't use add-ons. And this is not exactly because of their choice. Blizzard tournaments don't allow the use of PvP add-ons or add-ons in general. So they want to practice the way they're going to compete in a tournament. There's no reason to practice with a bunch of add-ons and becoming kind of reliant on them, then showing up for a tournament and you don't have access to any of that. So they just choose to basically use no add-ons at all and just practice the way they're going to compete. But for you, if you're probably not thinking about competing, then you should definitely use add-ons, because add-ons make everything much easier. And especially from me, who's coming from more of a PvE perspective, I've come to understand that add-ons can improve a lot of things that the default game has a lot of flaws with. The only arena-specific add-on I would recommend for beginners is either Gladius or S Arena. I will have both of them linked in the description box. These 2 essentially serve the exact same function. They improve your arena frames, and they show things like trinkets, DRs, health bar, allow you to set to focus or target. So they just make your life a lot easier. And you will come to kind of rely on these as you climb up the ladder. And then as you go along, you will probably end up downloading more add-ons. But just to start with, I recommend getting either Gladius or S Arena. Later on, you can get things like Omni CC or cooldown trackers, things like that. But just to start with, one of those two add-ons is plenty. As far as your UI goes, you can pretty much go any way. You can set up a UI that looks more like a Raider style, the way I have it set up. You can have a more minimalistic one set up. But there are a few important things to keep in mind. You always want to be able to track your teammates' CCs. So whenever they get CC'd, if for example your healer is in a freezing trap or something, then you want to be able to react to that and make the correct decisions based on him being CC'd. The other significant thing is being able to track debuffs and buffs on your targets. Because obviously you don't want to be hitting into a rogue evasion, or you want to play a little more defensive when your enemies pop cooldowns. So as long as you're able to see those and kind of make decisions based on them, then your UI should be fine and just go with whatever you like the way it looks. The last thing before jumping into Arena is to have a general idea of your talent setup, and when it comes to PvP talents, basic talents, and some of the Azerite traits for some of the classes. Now, on certain classes and specs, Azerite traits are less important than others, so I would still have a general idea of what's better for your spec, but talents and PvP talents, you should definitely know what to use before going into the arena. There's a few different ways of getting these. You can check websites like PvP leaderboards or just the official Blizzard leaderboard and look at classes and specs that you're playing and then check their build. Because more often than not, if they're wearing PvP gear, it means that they're also in their PvP build. If you see someone wear PvE gear, so they have PvE and PvP, then you might want to check through a few of them because they might be in their PvE setup, which might be different. But you are good to use basically a cookie cutter build or a basic build from top players early on. This is because it will give you a starting point that you can build on later. So once you kind of get familiar with Arena, you will know in what situations you should change talents, what situation you should change PvP talents in, or if you just stay with the same thing the entire time. That will kind of just develop. All you need is a basic starting point. So now that you have everything set up, you're ready to jump into Arena, and this means finding someone to play with. And if you don't have friends who PvP, then you're probably going to turn to the looking for group or the LFG system. And here you're going to see two major abbreviations which will pop up in basically any listing. First one is CR, which stands for current rating. So this is whatever your current rating is in the specific bracket, so 2v2 or 3v3. And that will kind of indicate at where other people are compared to you when you want to queue up with them. And it's important to find people who are about the same current rating as yourself, but it's not necessary. The second thing is EXP or just XP. And this is the experience of the player, and that just stands for the highest rating that they ever achieved. If I achieved 2400 in Wrath of the Lich King, I would list my experience as 2400. Or you can also list current experience or, last season's experience. But in general, people just list their highest ever. If you are a player whose character is lower geared maybe, then I suggest listing your own group because people tend to be pretty prejudiced about eye level. If you're lower eye level, they're not very likely to accept you into a group. But if you make your own group, then people cannot see your eye level, and as long as you play well, people are not going to be questioning your gear. If you're at a higher eye level, then I definitely recommend just scrolling through and looking if there are people that you might want to play with, and if not, then go ahead and list your own group. When deciding who to play with from the LFG system, you kind of want to have a general idea of what other classes your spec synergizes well with. So it is possible to reach a reasonable rating with pretty much any comp, but I suggest playing meta comps if you're just getting into PvP. And what a meta comp is, it's basically comps that are popular, or they're somehow overpowered, or they're very strong. You will see these on streams very often. So for example, currently you have Fire Mage Rogue, Holy Paladin, or things like DH Boomkin Resto Shaman. So things like that are considered meta comps. But one thing that I would definitely keep in mind whenever picking up people from the LFG is their experience. Especially if you're a newer player, playing with higher experienced players can be very, very beneficial. And I can't tell you how much I've learned from just queuing with people who have been higher rated in the past, or are currently higher rated on their mains or on other alts. because they have insight that you don't really have. So they will most likely do things that you will only notice later on and be like, oh, okay, I should start doing that. The last question for Arena is, do I queue 2v2 or 3v3? If you're a newer player, I definitely recommend queuing 2v2 first, because 3s can be very hectic if you don't know what's going on, and it's very likely that early on you will have a very limited understanding of every other spec in the game, and even your own spec in PvP, since it does change from PvE. And in 2s, it also gives you a chance to understand your spec very well, and kind of get an understanding of everything else in the game at kind of a slower pace. 3s games are usually pretty fast-paced, while 2s are usually a little more drawn out, and you have time to react to things, you can make more mistakes, and they're not as heavily punished. So in 2v2, your main goal is to first understand your spec, understand enemy specs and what they do, and then understand your class's limitations, you know, how much damage you can do, how much damage you can take. And then once you feel comfortable with that, you're ready to jump into 3v3. Thank you everyone for watching the first episode of the Art of Warcraft, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the description box. On the next episode, I will be talking about the importance of knowing enemy comps, the importance of knowing your own comp, and some general arena mechanics which some people might not understand to the fullest extent. Again, if you'd like to support the channel, make sure to check out my Patreon link in the description box, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and sub to the channel. See you guys on the next one.